So let me introduce first of all Dan, and well, you know Dan. Dan was here the last year. He's actually the main guy, so I'm just a fill in time. So please welcome Dan.
Hi there, everybody. Yes, my name's Daniel. Like Chris this morning on the Global Core team for the DevOps Days Conference series. I had the pleasure to attend last year's event. It was an excellent event, and I'm happy to be here again. I have the honor of animating this a little bit here, and I'll be doing an Ignite tomorrow. That'll be a lot of fun. So the DevOps Days Conference series is all about community, and it's something that we try very, very hard to foster at all the events around the world. And so everybody here today, you're part of that community, you're part of a local community here in Kyiv and the local region, but also part of a larger community of DevOps Days Conference attendees around the world. So an important part of being part of community is talking and interacting with your community members. So I encourage you over the course of the day today, if there's anybody here that you don't know or don't know that well, go up, start a conversation, talk about what it is that you do, talk about what it is that you like. Also, feel free to come and talk up with all the speakers after the event. We're all wandering around. We're going to be here for a couple days. And don't forget the open spaces this afternoon. The open spaces are a lot of fun. They're the best opportunity to learn and grow and talk and feel like you're part of a greater community. So that's my spiel. I'll be helping out for the rest of the day. Definitely, I'm pretty approachable. I don't speak any of the local languages. For that, I apologize. So English, French, or Portuguese only. Sorry. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to the man known as the remorseless eating machine, Paul Char, everybody.
Hi, everyone. I've been thinking about this topic for a little while, and I finally started, putting pen to paper about it. And it's about how I feel that we've had this kind of obsessive thing around culture, and maybe that's not necessarily the thing that we should be focusing on as much in DevOps. And I'll get into why I think that is in a little bit. But first of all, introduce myself. So this is me. My colleague Josh Long said it's very important to have a large photo of yourself on your first slide, so I did that. I live in Austin, Texas, but I'm originally from Australia. I moved to America about 10 years ago, and because of moving to America, I had to buy an extra large shirt yesterday. I used to, back when I was Australia, I used to look a little bit better. This is a photo of me back in Australia. I was kind of ripped. Now I'm kind of just frumpy, blobby, I don't know what the right word is. So I have a special connection with Ukraine. Does anyone know where this town is? Vysychka? I didn't think so. So it's a very small town there. And my grandfather was born there, but you're probably aware there were some difficulties. But this is actually the house he lived in. This is me visiting the house he lived in. So it changed a little bit. Thankfully, he was fighting for the Polish army, so he didn't get rounded up with the rest of the family and taken to the Katyn forest. So I'm thankful for that. So I've come back to Ukraine a few times. Usually I come into Lviv and sort of make my way down through Ternopil and visit my family's area. And so I really enjoy being in Ukraine. And I've been trying to look for a while for a way I can maybe live part-time in Ukraine and part-time in Austin, Texas. So if you know any company at all that happens to have an office in Lviv and an office in Austin, Texas, I would love to meet them. Any company at all, I don't have any specifics, and maybe if they'd be willing to pay me a lot of money to live in Ukraine and America, that would be great. So I guess we get started. John's in the back, so he's going to enjoy this. So John invented this thing called CAMS, which we then extended to CALMS later. Was it Damon Edwards that added the L? Jez Humble, that's right, thank you. So we have this culture, automation, lean, measurement sharing. Hopefully that's not new to you. If it is new to you, you clearly weren't listening to John earlier. And we've really focused on this culture part of it. In a lot of ways, we've thought of this as the most important part of DevOps. And it is, but it's also kind of the most dangerous, because if you just think about culture specifically, as a practitioner, that's not something that I can change in a large company that I work for, right? I can't just show up and magically change the culture and make it what I want it to be. And it's just something that's built into your company. It's kind of ingrained into their DNA, and it's engraved into their incentives and behavior structures. And I was talking to John earlier, and he actually brought that up as well. It's actually about the behavior. Now, a company's culture is kind of like a biological organism, right? Over a bunch of time, like through trial and error, all these cells joined together and formed like organs and other fleshy bits. I'm not a doctor. And to form this like functioning but very fragile living creature, where all of these parts have to work a very specific way in order for that organism to continue functioning. And so it developed all of these defense mechanisms that try and stop a foreign body from changing parts of itself, because that any instability there can destroy the entire organism. And so we built up this immune system, and like I think every living organism has some sort of immune system or system that fights foreign objects and diseases and stuff. And I think companies are similar that way. And so if you just want to come in and like build a little bit of DevOps in the corner here, it's going to be seen by the company culture as kind of a foreign object, and you're kind of going to get ejected from that immune response. So you can't just show up and be like, I'm going to do the DevOps and expect things to work out. Because culture is driven by behavior, and that is driven by incentives. And the people at the top, the executives, they're the ones that set that incentive, right? So the executives, et cetera, basically drive through incentives the behavior of the people that work for your organization. So if you want to change culture, you need to change your leadership. And you know, those leaders were put in place by that very same culture that you're talking about changing. So it's kind of an existential threat to the leadership in your org, especially that like middle management tier of leadership, who kind of like things just the way they are. So I'm going to go back and forth a few times. I'm going to like talk about a few things that I've been through in the past, some stories of previous jobs, and then just talk about more general cultural stuff. So I'm going to start with an anecdote about leadership and change, or not change, spoiler alert. I was working for a company. I don't like to name and shame companies I've worked for, especially if I'm saying maybe not so nice things about them. So I'm just going to use their initials. So I'm working for this unnamed company, right? You could never guess who it is. And I was actually acquired into that company, which if you ever get acquired into a larger company, just leave. Right, John? Just leave? Yeah. Don't stick around for your 2-year vesting period. Just get up and walk out. But I was in the internal server hosting group of this company, right? So anytime anyone wanted some servers or wanted software installed on servers, that was our jobs. And we were really bad at it, like really epically bad at it. We had this like shitty service, and I swear a lot. I'm sorry. I feel like Ukrainian people are probably okay with the occasional shit, so I'm okay. And we cost a fortune because we were so inefficient. We were really expensive. And so everyone was dissatisfied. All the people that we forced to use our service were really dissatisfied with us. And they all wanted to either run their own servers or use this cloud thing that we'd sort of started hearing about, but nobody really understood. And we did what all smart, progressive organizations do. And we were like, no, you have to use us. You don't have a choice. You're not allowed to go elsewhere. And so we didn't really try and improve. We just like put up walls and tried to force people to use our service. Eventually, like the larger org is like, this is not cool. Like, you need to get your shit together. You need to get your house in order. And so we did what you do when someone tells you need to get your ship in order. We brought in some change consultants because that always solves your problems, right? And I think we were looking for a magic pill, and I don't know that they got a magic pill. But this company spent a couple of months with us, and they were kind of observing how we worked. They would sit in meetings, they'd interview staff, the usual kind of things. I'd gotten pretty friendly with them, and I'd already decided I was going to leave the company, so I was very happy to be very honest and frank with them. And they were in turn very honest and frank with me. So we had some long, interesting discussions. And as I'm finishing up, they were also finishing up their what they were doing, and were getting ready to hand in their report. And I was like, so this company is fucked. Like, what are you going to tell them? Like, what are they going to change? Because we all know where the problem is. And they were like, well, effectively, like, if you read between the lines, it says to like get rid of at least half of your leadership team and bring in new blood and focus on like changing how we work. But you know, we're gonna do it in nicer terms. We're gonna throw around terms like lean and DevOps and whatever to try and soften that blow. So I was like, yeah, okay. So what are they gonna do? And she said, well, they'll tell us that they no longer require us. We'll go on to the next company that wants to do a change consultant. So I wasn't there for the meeting. I don't know how it was framed. But the result of the meeting was not that we changed leadership. They just hired a DevOps team because that's going to solve the problem. And then they built out a VMware private cloud, which is also going to solve the problem because we solve these problems with technology, right? It was about 5 years ago, and I understand that it still takes weeks, sometimes months, to get a virtual machine, out of this VMware private cloud. So maybe they've still got a little bit of work to go. But I have heard that they have a Kubernetes cluster coming in soon, and that's going to solve all of their problems. Right? So we're back to culture. I kind of wanted to touch on this word, meritocracy. We've probably all heard this word either at companies we've worked for or in, say, large open source foundations, not naming any specifically. And we like to throw this word around almost as an excuse of our unwelcoming culture. And we measure things in this meritocracy to like enhance the people that are already there, right? So like weird things like, you know, lines of code given in by a developer, lines of code given in by a company that happens to be also paying a lot of money to the open source foundation, stuff like that. And you end up building these monocultures where like the merits are very arbitrary and everyone looks like this, white middle-aged man. So in theory, a meritocracy is advantageous for me because it allows me to fail upwards spectacularly, but I'm not really into that. And so what's interesting about the word meritocracy is it was actually first said in a paper by this guy, Michael Dunlop Young, in 1958. And it was actually a word to make fun of the British elite. And so he was already talking about how like a meritocracy, he invented the word, is like a bad thing and it's very divisive. And so it's funny now that we've taken this word that was meant to be pejorative, it was meant to be making fun of us, and we've like adopted it and like, we're a meritocracy. So anyway, culture. So I'm kind of positing that as a practitioner, you can't change it. And if you're in a leadership position, in a lot of ways, you're incentivized not to change that culture. And you're probably also not at a DevOps Days conference if you're an executive leader. But we keep kind of banging on this culture drum. And we're not, I think as John said earlier, we're not really a lot of the ways explaining what we actually mean by culture. And so I certainly, early days of DevOps, just got in my head that I need to just instill a DevOps culture no matter what. And it turns out, if you choose to die on a hill, you're going to die on that fucking hill. And so like a couple of times, I did it twice because, you never learn the first time. But, you're like, I'm going to bring in the DevOps, and you kind of form this little team of like-minded people, and you start doing some DevOpsy stuff, and you do some good things. But you've really just kind of created this like little bubble of DevOps inside the larger org. And eventually that like immune response finds you, and you get like purged from that system quite violently. It's like a cultural dysentery. So like, if you don't decide to die on a hill, you won't die on that hill. So like, you can either make change or you can't. And trying to change something you don't have control over is kind of a shortcut to burnout and like poor mental health outcomes. So choosing not to die on a hill is a good start. And so I'm at a DevOps Days conference telling you that you can't change culture. If you try, you'll probably burn out. You'll at least be unhappy. So, what are you going to do? I guess you could just give up, which that's cool if you want to do that. But I don't think that's like our only option. I think even though we can't necessarily make big, broad changes to the culture as an individual contributor, I don't necessarily think you have to. Now, there's a lesson you can take from alcoholics, and I don't mean drink until you stop feeling those feelings. At Alcoholics Anonymous, they have this prayer for serenity. And it's effectively saying just, like, there are some things you can't change, and it's getting wound up about those changes that drive you to whatever your addiction is. And so try and identify the things you can't change and the things you can, and just figure out the difference and just focus on the things you can change, the things you do have control over. Some famous DevOps or another said, change your job or change your job. I think it was Jesse Robbins? Stephen Nelson Smith, there you go. And I think that's kind of misleading. Like, you can't change your job. Well, you can change your job by quitting, the second one, but you can't necessarily change your job. And so maybe the right way to say it is like, accept your job or change your job. So like, understand your company, its culture, and then decide whether or not you can work within its parameters or go work somewhere where you can. And that other company you are looking at, that you think you should go work at, the view from outside is very different to the view from inside. And so you may not necessarily find out the fun cultural issues in the new company until you get in there. So it's really important as you're looking at companies to like try and spend some time, and remember you're interviewing them as much or more so than they're interviewing you. So really dig in, try and get some people like that work there, and like buy them a couple of beers. People are a lot more honest about the 5 beer mark, I find. Maybe Ukrainian like 10 beers. I think Ukrainians can drink a little bit better than Americans. Australians, it's 15 beers. We're really good at drinking. And then just accept that every company is a fucking shit show, right? Except for SoftServe. I've heard they're amazing. It's up to you to choose the shit show that you're willing to work in, that you can like achieve some level of satisfaction and personal sense of achievement at. Have you seen the Westrum topology of cultures? So this Westrum guy is like, well, there's really 3 types of cultures in an organization. Pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. And if you want to look at the Conway's Law stuff that John mentioned, like just from this, there's only one of these cultures capable of building a proper microservices system, and that's that generative performance-oriented. Over at the far side, the pathological, etc., they're only ever going to build big monolithic things. It may look and smell like microservices, but it's probably just a bunch of stuff talking through Kafka, and it's really just a monolith dressed up as microservices. So in pathological culture, we kind of have this minimal cooperation. There's a lot of blame and scapegoating. People that are actually achieving are pulled down so that you don't make everyone else look bad. And there's a lot of energy spent on trying to get out of work than actually doing that work. In a bureaucratic organization, there is some cooperation between teams, but there's a lot of people who are like, oh, that's not my job, you need to go to the security team, or that's not my job, you need to do that. And then they do encourage experimentation, but then novelty and failure are punished. So it's cool to experiment, but only if it's successful. But then you have generative, right, which is people are empowered, experimentation and failure is celebrated. It's like high trust across the org. Everyone sort of understands that everyone is working for the same goal and going to get out of each other's way. And there's sharing and learning that happens. And I just put up some buzzwords that kind of fit into each of those categories as I was going through. You're probably about here. I think most companies are somewhere in the spectrum between pathological and bureaucratic. And that's okay. Like, you can try and form those bubbles of like DevOps awesomeness. But just in trying to do that, it's only going to last for as long as you're there to really push for it, or as long as the company is willing to kind of let you do your own weird thing. And usually it ends badly. Only one of these groups is really capable of that DevOps culture, and again, that's the generative. But there are plenty of things in any of these cultures, whichever of these cultures you happen to sit in, that you can do to like at least make your life less bad and help those like directly around you. Right? And so this is what Jesse Robbins said. He said, don't fight stupid, just make more awesome. Like, if you're going to fight stupid, you've got to get down to their level, and they're going to out-stupid you every time. So just focus on being awesome and helping those around you being awesome, rather than diving down to their level. So back to comms, I think the word culture is fine, but maybe what we really meant is something closer to empathy, right? When you think about empathy, like most people around you aren't bad people. They're just a product of that culture, of that org's culture, right? And empathy is hard. We tend to go easy on ourselves because we understand our own intentions, but we judge others by their behavior because without empathy, we cannot see their intentions. So we don't know what they were trying to do. And then like nobody thinks of themselves as a villain. So everyone thinks they're trying to do the right thing, but there's just not that empathy to see that in each other and figure out how we can all, while trying to do the right thing in our own weird ways, actually work together to achieve that right thing. So using empathy really helps you understand people's motivations and what makes them tick. And if you understand those things, then you can learn how to turn them into an ally. And to really understand like your company culture and how to navigate your company culture, you kind of use empathy upwards and you look at your manager and like, what constraints is my manager under? What incentives does my manager have? And like if your manager is actually just a piece of shit person, then find someone like around him or above him that is actually, a good person that is trying to work in the system. And so like maybe look above and like who is he working for? Like what are her motivations? How does she assess his and his team's or your team's performance? You're looking for someone who can kind of mentor you and like teach you how to work within the culture and the organization without having to fight it, right? Because as soon as you start fighting the organization, it'll fight back way harder than you. So you kind of want that mentor that's not necessarily going to teach you how to like be a low performing like middle manager, but who can like teach you how to work around the organization and also exactly what the organization looks like and like what it values. Because if you know what the organization values, you can at least game those values to achieve what you want. And so back to comms, like there's things inside of comms that you can use day to day, whether it's just you, whether it's your like closest group. So I'll go through a few of them. We haven't got a lot of time, so I'm going to go through pretty quick. There's clearly a lot of things in each one, but I'm just going to focus on like one thing. And so with lean, obviously we borrowed that from like Toyota, lean manufacturing, etc. It isn't agile, although if you take like the lean practices and you apply them to software and infrastructure, you kind of get the intention or the spirit of agile, just without all the bullshit ceremony. Like there's no story points or burn down charts, nothing like that. Just processes that are actually focused on helping the practitioner himself or herself achieve that continuous improvement. You look at the Toyota Kata and all that stuff. It's all about the practitioner, not necessarily about the organization. So Kanban is obviously something we use in Lean. It's a visualization tool that helps you optimize your flow of work. And it does this a few ways. One of the main things is it tracks and limits the amount of work in progress of each person. So you've probably seen Kanban before, I hope. So really simple, like 3 columns: to do, doing, done. And then as you discover work, you put it in to do. As you work on it, you put it in doing, and then you're done. Pretty simple. You can make it a bit more complicated if you want. But that work in progress constraint really helps you get stuff done. Because in reality, like you can't really multitask, and context switching is expensive. And so by saying you can only have 3 things in the doing column per person, you're really restricting that and letting people just focus on like individual tasks and getting things done. And sometimes you'll add like an icebox because often you'll be waiting on people and you end up with nothing in doing and you're sitting around going, what? So feel free to add an icebox, like modify it to suit you. In a scrum or a sprint, there's like no way to handle unplanned work. So as soon as you get things that you didn't plan for, which is like every single sprint, you kind of mess with your burn down chart, you don't achieve your sprint, everyone feels bad. Whereas Kanban, if you have unplanned work, you just add it in the board and you keep on working and you're cool. So if you can get your team using Kanban, that's going to be great. I've used Kanban really successful in a bunch of infrastructure groups, in a bunch of like DevOps groups, and even software development orgs, and it's worked really well for us. But you can also use Kanban just on your own if you don't have that luxury. There's a really good blog post by Jerome, who's like one of the sweetest, kindest, and most knowledgeable people in the container world, about how he used Kanban to try and help get his productivity back after going through a pretty severe bout of depression. And so I thought I'd share a few things from his blog post. And so he kind of mentions that he kind of realized that Kanban is about that like restriction on how many things you're working on at a time. And that's really the secret to how you actually get a lot done in Kanban. So he's decided to set up a personal Kanban board. He made it a little bit more complex. He had a few more roles, and sorry about the blurriness of the slide. But so instead of just the 3 columns, he had a few more. We'll go through them real quick. So to do was anything he knew that he had coming up that he was going to work on at some point. Then he had a this week column, which was like, I think he had 10 items, and this was things I think I want to work on this week, or things I want to achieve this week. And then he had a this day column, so as every morning, he would what things do I want to actually do today, what do I want to get through today? And I think he had a limit of 5 tasks there. And then he had a this hour column, which could hold up to 3 tasks, and that is things that I want to work on and complete, this hour. And that name is actually really good because it's also a reminder that you should only work on small items and not have these big tasks that just end up with a board that has no momentum on them. So this hour is actually a really good apt name. And of course, done. And he talks about done being a great way to remind yourself that you've actually achieved something. Like at the end of the day, you've got 4 or 5 tasks in the done column. Cool, I did a bunch of stuff. You feel pretty good, right? So you can have a little retro at the end of the day and be like, cool, I did some stuff, I feel good. Get a little bit of boost of those feel good things. There's plenty more things in Lean. John mentioned value stream mapping a little bit. Value stream mapping is really great, but you in a way, you need things to be already a little bit advanced to maybe where you were. But what I found is, if you find groups around you that are very inefficient, you can almost do a mental value stream map and just from talking to them, figure out what their biggest bottleneck is. And if you're ready to actually start going out and helping other teams, it's a really good way of okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to help you put out some fires, and then we'll talk about how I helped you put out those fires. And generally use automation to do that. We're at a DevOps conference, so we're not scared of the word automation. We're past the idea that automation is going to take our jobs away. We use that automation to remove unnecessary toil, to clear out those repetitive, boring tasks that allow us to focus on creating value rather than fighting fires. If you use Jira and you constantly have tickets on changing DNS settings on a bunch of bind servers, right? You can automate that away, get yourself some free time back. And your company probably already has a bunch of automation tools in it. They may not be good automation tools, but they have them, right? And I kind of push for whatever they have, you could probably use it and use it well. I've seen some really effective automation done with just 4 loops and Perl one-liners. And so with enough lack of disregard for your own sanity, you can actually use any tool to automate your stuff. The goal, though, is to reduce that toil, to get rid of that manual work. So an example, if you're changing DNS settings on a bunch of servers, if you have Chef or Puppet or whatever, you can probably do it within that system. Why you're not already doing that system, I'm not sure, but you should be. If you don't, if your company is a little bit behind on that, if you're editing zone files on a DNS server, you're probably SSHing in and running Vi. Well, there's tools like Ansible that work over SSH, so you can write yourself a little personal playbook to do that work for you, and then use that and go from a thing that used to take you an hour to a thing that now takes you a couple of minutes, and then you can share that with your team, stick it in GitHub, etc. Right? So you start using tools like Ansible that kind of almost emulate a person doing the work, but it's actually a machine doing the work, and it's not necessarily, installing agents and doing other stuff on servers that you might get into trouble for. And then, so as you start automating things away, you actually find you get more and more time freed up to do more and more automation and other value additive work. And that's good. You start moving away from being a cost center, and you start to actually add value to the org instead of take value away from the org. So of course you want to then share that automation with your peers, the people you're working with, the people that are working on that same Jira ticket queue. Help them out as well. If you write a really awesome Ansible playbook to do that common task. Share it with them, so put it in GitHub, teach them how to use it, and teach them why and how you did what you did, and try and instill, like, the more we do this, the more time we're going to have freed up to, like, actually do things that exercise our brains instead of just, like, exercising our fingers. And usually, you kind of, it's almost like a parrot repeating, like, you say hello and it's hello. It's kind of like that, right? And if you get them repeating that word hello every once in a while, they'll start to get good at it, and they'll start doing it at random times during the day without you having to prompt them. And so you're kind of changing other people's behavior by just showing them little things they can do. And so you're kind of starting to get in the realm of changing culture, but you still haven't been like, we're doing the DevOps now. And then you want to provide measurements of, like, increasing that value. And there's a trick here, right? Because you need two sets of metrics. One that's actually the real value that you're adding, and the other one is the things that the business thinks they care about. So, like, the business cares about lines of code. I wrote some Ansible, that counts as lines of code, right? Oh, they care about some weird metric about, like, how many machines are virtualized. Well, I can show that too. It's a shitty bullshit metric, but I can game it, and I can show the business that I'm adding value. But at the same time, I'm also measuring the things that I think actually matter, so I can show myself I'm adding value, and I can get myself that feeling of self-satisfaction that I've done something well. Because your goal is to become valued in the organization. So you need to game those metrics, whatever metrics they've given you. So that was kind of a quick run through CARMS or EARMS. There's not really any good way to say that. Maybe that's why we said CARMS. Maybe just culture made a better acronym. And so you've done that. You've built up some allies in your little team. You've gotten yourself some free time. You can now, like, there are other people in the org that are having a shitty time of it. There's probably a team near you, and they're probably called security and or compliance, that are doing a lot of manual toil, that are doing a lot of repetitive work. And so you can start, like, maybe now I have some time, I'll help them. And so you can do a quick value stream map if you feel like you need to, but chances are you'll spend 5 minutes with them and you'll be like, I can name 6 things I can help you with right now that are going to make your life a little bit less shitty. And then so you can go to them. And you can't just, like, run in and say, DevOps, or, you know, start throwing tools, Ansible, Puppet, Chef, whatever at them. They're too busy fighting those fires, right, to actually look at better ways to work. So instead, you kind of just slip in and you put out some of the fires, and so they're suddenly fighting a few less fires, and they kind of look up and like, wait, what happened? And then you can go in and say, well, this is how I did it, and this is how I can help you do it, and we can get all of these fires under control. And you start teaching them. So back to another story. This is another company I worked for. Again, I was acquired into that company. Again, I'll give you the advice. If you get acquired into a large company, leave. So different company, different job. I still want to protect the innocent, but it would be really obvious if I use their initials. I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to use a collection of symbols. All right, took a second. So I'm at a startup. We got acquired by them. And we went from a team of 5 people to a team of 65 people overnight. And so that was a little bit rough for us. But part of it is we inherited this security and compliance team. And their job was to make sure that our servers were compliant to their internal compliance document. And this document, it kind of read more like Moby Dick than a compliance doc, right? It didn't really tell you every single setting and what it should be. It was like a long-form essay on just like what a Linux server should look like in our org. And so it wasn't particularly useful. And so there was these security and compliance teams scattered across the company, and they all had to interpret this and figure out what their process was to ensure that compliance. And so they all did it kind of differently, which was kind of interesting. And so I was used to coming from using things like STIG, which is a very defined set of controls and actions to this. So it was very open to interpretation. The team we inherited had these things called tech specs. And they were Excel documents, we love Excel documents, that they would save into like Dropbox or Box.com or one of those things. And so what they would do, and it had every setting that should be set on each server, and then they would go through this, for every server, they would copy this into a new document, they would like save it with a date and the name of the server, and then they would go through from top to bottom hundreds of settings and like check everything. It was like, you know, checking that like Etsy password was owned by the right user, had the right settings for hundreds of settings. And so it took them like ages to go through each server. And we brought a couple of thousand servers along with us. And so that, added up. And so there was like tons of wasted time in just doing this work, right? And they had and we were also doing the hardcore DevOps, right? So we had everything in Ansible and everything running through Jenkins, and we were very DevOpsy. The rest of the org, not so much. And so what was happening is they would go through and they would remediate issues that were not compliant on our servers. And Ansible would show up and say, that's not what I wanted, and set it right back. And so every time they checked a server, it was back to that old uncompliant stage, right? And so that was super frustrating for them. And so I didn't have to do a value stream map to figure out how to remove their bottlenecks. What was their biggest toil points? And there was I think they had 4 full-time headcount just doing this work right, over and over again. So this was prime for automation. This is kind of the stuff I love. I knew I had to approach it carefully. I didn't want them to think I was going to come and take their jobs away or eliminate their jobs. I just wanted to see that I was there to try and make their lives a little bit less sucky, and I wanted to help them be a little bit happier. So I was like, well, how about I stop our automation from making our servers non-compliant? So at least once you've set it once, it'll stay that way, and our automation will actually continue to make sure that that is set. And I knew that there was this thing called Ansible hardening. It's a set of playbooks originally came out of Rackspace. And it follows the STIG guidelines, and I'll show you what a STIG control looks like in a second. Yeah, so this is the STIG control. It's a set of controls, this file should be set like this, and it gives you an exact command to run to verify, and it tells you exactly how to fix it, right? So it's really, really good. It's really specific. And I posited that our internal compliance and STIG were probably going to have a lot of overlap, and so let's implement this because we can do this really quickly, and then we can look at the gaps. And so we did that. It took me a couple of weeks to get it in, do the right amount of testing, and push it out to all of our automation. But now, when they changed, when they looked at our servers, they were fairly compliant because they were matching most of our things. I'm like, okay, now we can go and find the delta. We can see what's different about our compliance and just fix those bits. And again, we can use Ansible to do that. And so I showed them this and said, this is an Ansible task. It's really quite simple. So let's pick a few items from your things that are still not compliant. I'll teach you how to write Ansible tasks, and then you can start writing them yourselves. And we'll make sure that all of our servers are just compliant to start with. And so that was cool, and we started working on that. I was also aware of this tool that had come out of Chef. 5 minutes? Wow. All right, called Inspec. And Inspec is really great. It's like a compliance tester, so you run Inspec, it goes through your tests. We've got a break, right? So I'll lead into the break, it's fine. It has a really easy to write DSL, right? And so you run it, it goes through all of the various settings, and then lets you know if your server is compliant or not. And it looks a little bit like this. And the STIG comes in they have an XML version of their document. So I was able to run it through some Ruby and basically generate the inspec for every single STIG control, and we just had to fill in that thing at the bottom, which is the actual test, and so all the metadata was done. And so it took a couple of weeks again, but we had all of STIG was now being testable via inspec. And then I actually had our security team, we know what our delta is because we just built the Ansible tasks to set the compliance. So we can write inspect checks to check for what is the rest of it, right? And so the team started to build that. And what I thought was really cool is on their own, obviously they'd started to take in some of this stuff because on their own they added these remediation and documentation tags. And so if it failed, it literally told you exactly how to fix it and maybe why it should be set. And I thought that was kind of cool. So we now had the automation Ansible, so remediation of the compliance. And then we had automated testing of that compliance with Inspec. So now, we weren't wasting weeks and weeks testing the servers, right? You would, instead of 6 or 7 hours to test each server, it was now 6 or 7 minutes to run Inspec. And you'd even run Inspec across groups of servers and get a report for this entire environment if you wanted to. And so now there was a ton of, suddenly a lot of toil and a lot of excess work went away. That wasn't quite enough for me. I wanted to make it super automated. So I'm we're already using monitoring, right? We have Sensu to do monitoring. We should have Sensu once a day run Inspec on every server and alert if something goes wrong. Now we don't have to manually check machines. You're going to get told by the monitoring system if a machine is out of compliance. So we put that in, and then Sensu was logging everything to our ELK cluster. So we also had automated like reports of every server every time it ran. So if a server was out of compliance, we would get a ticket. We weren't getting paged about it because it wasn't something to wake someone up at 3 a.m. But within a day or two, it would get resolved. And then we had these the logs in our ELK cluster. And so we now had this kind of this group of things that had replaced that manual toil. And we had everything stored in a retrievable way, etc. The security and compliance team had learned how to write Ansible tasks, then learned how to write inspect checks, and we're making contributions back to our infrastructure as code. So that was a huge win. Like everyone, that whole group was now helping actually improve our code and improve our resilience. So not only had I helped them, but they were now helping me, right? So that was a double win. And we kind of proved that when that team, kind of on their own, figured out how to add their compliance checks to our CI pipeline. So now anytime I made an Ansible change or we made a change in the software itself, it would run the inspect checks across our test infrastructure and validate that we hadn't just broken our own compliance, right? And so if we broke it, the pull request would be marked as bad and you'd have to go back and fix it, right? So we now had like instant feedback if we were going to cause problems in the future. We didn't have to wait until it was deployed to production. You go, oh, wait, I shouldn't have said that. So it was a huge win. Security team no longer were doing all this manual work, and they were able to report back to management that they were saving like tens of thousands of dollars of wasted manual labor. And not only that, but they had actually improved our time to repair. They had improved the reporting. They did like a monthly roundup of reports of compliance activities, and that came straight out of our Elastic cluster, right? There was no human work involved in any of that. And so they gained this immense amount of trust from their leadership and the org. I gained an immense amount of trust with this team, and I gained these allies that were also actually working towards my purpose, and we're no longer doing that manual toil. Yeah. And so because I wasn't fighting culture, I was instead just focusing on like helping individuals and then helping teams. I was able to like change their behavior, which in a way is like changing culture, but without going out and fighting that culture. And we were able to improve like our systems and infrastructure across the org in like a DevOpsy way. Postscript, not long after we implemented this, they shut our whole project down. So didn't have a happy ending, but that's cool. So you can't change culture, except obviously you can. So if you want to do a top-down change of culture, my colleague and occasional friend, Michael Cote, wrote this book. That's basically an executive view and telling executives how they can work to change culture. So definitely, if you're interested in that perspective, this is worth reading. It's a free ebook. You can download it. He doesn't make any money out of it, which is sweet. And then, of course, Pivotal, I'm supposed to tell you about how we help people change culture, and we actually go in and help people do that, but I'm not here to sell you anything. So that's kind of all I have. I'm not trying to sell you on anything, so I'd rather just talk about helping you sleep at night, helping you like feel better, be happier, have higher job satisfaction at work, etc. So thank you. Thanks for listening.
How about another round of applause for Paul, everybody? Seriously, that was a lot of fun. Thanks, Paul. I don't know if we have time for Q&A or if we're trying to, if I could get one of the organizers who actually has a clock.
No, we should go straight to break.
Should we go straight to break?
Yeah.
Paul's around for the next couple of days. Right. We all are.
We've got open spaces and also.
We've got open spaces. Let's go straight to break. If you want to have some coffee, take a bio break, do something healthy, maybe, for the next couple of minutes. We'll see you back here right away.